All right, I think we are up and going. So happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy last Wednesday of September. I am Brittany Roberson, the Choice Neighborhood Initiative Coordinator with NWSP Partners. So if this is your first time joining us for a weekly webinar, welcome. Thank you for attending. If you are one of our repeat offenders, thank you for joining us per usual. We love to have you all. So I am just going to start the screen sharing so that way we can get right into our presentation and our guest speaker. All right, here we go. All right, so again, happy Wednesday, happy last Wednesday of September. I like to say this is the best month of the year, but I am a little biased. So if you are looking for community resources or COVID-19 resources, we are the place to find some of those things. So just as a FYI for everyone, voting is getting ready to come up. So as we all know, we are kind of on some COVID restrictions. So if you have not already placed your order for your mail-in ballot, you might want to get that in sooner than later to make sure that you can place your vote. Secondly, if you need COVID resources, again, please visit the Near West Side Partners website, we have an entire page dedicated just to COVID resources. Next thing is the Valete Street Oasis had their big grand opening last week. And so they have been in business for a couple of weeks now, but last week was their big grand opening. So if you have the chance, please visit them Wednesday through Sunday, and take advantage of that produce stand. Again, that is a lot of our local neighborhood farmers who are there sourcing their products. So please, 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 make sure that we are supporting them. Next thing is Census 2020. Go ahead and make sure you are being counted. So there's another slide about that, so we'll go into it a little bit further. We do know that right now is a difficult time, again, for everybody in the multiple different facets. So we just want to make sure that people are aware, like, let's make sure we are finding ways to find peace, and that we are really taking care of self, because we know that that is hard to do right now. So please make sure you are taking care of yourself. Also, this Wednesday is our last cooking demonstration with Chef Lisa K. So if you're not following us on Facebook, you may want to go ahead and do that, because you will be able to find that video located on our Facebook page. So at 4 o'clock today, that'll be posted. So make sure that you're there and you see what's happening. She's also been working with the Valete Street Oasis to buy the produce that she is using to make the recipes. So again, tune in to our Made in the Near West Side this Wednesday. Also, Neighborhood House has a food pantry. It is open Wednesdays and Thursdays. On Wednesdays, it is open from 12 to 2. And on Thursdays, it is open from 4 to 6. So if you or someone you know is in need of a little bit of food assistance, please make sure that you get over there. They have been doing a great job of getting people in and out. So if you need it, please don't be afraid. Go. Again, these are difficult and hard times, and we want to make sure that everyone in our neighborhood is safe, healthy, and fed. All right, so back on to this 2020 census. If you haven't already been counted, please go to 2020census.gov and make sure you are counted. There are a multiple of things that the census helps do. One is helping bring resources to our neighborhoods. So if we are not counted in the census, it makes it a whole lot harder when we are looking for resources to bring into our neighborhood. So please, let's make sure that we are all being counted. From my understanding, the last day to submit for the census is actually today. But from the understanding I got from watching the candidates go back and forth yesterday, was that we might have a few more days, just a few, but just in case we don't, go ahead and make sure you get that in today for us. All right, so with that being said, here is our fun part. Less of me and more of other people. So today we are joined by Stephen Olikara, the founder and CEO of Millennial Action Project. So welcome, Stephen. We are happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Really appreciate it. I am so honored to be with the Near West Side Partners today. And Keith, if you're out there, thank you for making this happen, and to the entire support staff. I've really enjoyed getting to learn more about Near West Side and all the ways that you're supporting the community. And I'm honestly just in awe. Like, thank you for what you're doing. And I went on the website to look up which neighborhoods technically fit into the Near West Side. And it was like a nice trip down memory lane. So just by way of brief introduction, Stephen Olikara, CEO and founder of the Millennial Action Project, grew up in this area. And before I got into politics and trying to fix our democracy, my first passion in life was music. So when I look at the Near West Side, I think about all the venues and the gigs I had in the neighborhoods. And one that really stands out to me actually was at the rave. You know, when I was growing up, my dream was to perform at the rave someday because all of my favorite bands were playing there. And one day it happened. We were the opening act for a rock band called Flogging Molly. Some of you might remember them from the early 2000s. and it was just a dream come true. So lots of positive memories, and Washington Park and the Urban Ecology Center, I've really enjoyed experiences there as well. Now, this story of growing up playing music in Milwaukee actually directly led to Millennial Action Project. And let me explain how that happened. So when I was playing music, one of the best parts that got me so energized was playing with musicians across lines of difference and across different genres. So I was a bit unusual in the fact that I had a rock band, a punk rock band, I had a hip hop band with a turntables guy and a break dancer. We had a 70s era funk band, think James Brown, Earth, Wind and Fire, Stevie Wonder. I had a Eastern European folk band that played klezmer music, and extra points to anyone out there who knows what klezmer music is, and many other genres. And I think what I really enjoyed most about that was the fusions and the collisions of backgrounds and styles and the subcultures coming together. And that really exposed me to not only how music became better, our art was better when we were finding those areas of bridges and commonality, but also how I got more exposed to the different cultures within Milwaukee. And we all know here how segregated the city is. And so music for me was a powerful force to understand and bridge many of the racial and political divides in our community. So it was just an amazing education for me. Now, how does that lead to politics? Well, I became a radio DJ at WMSE 91.7, great radio station if you've ever tuned into them. And through that, I got more involved in community service. In fact, I do remember doing a service project at the Urban Ecology Center, and that was very transformative to me. And, you know, as a son of Indian immigrants, the idea of doing a professional track that's not engineering was very foreign to us. You know, as a good Indian son, I think I probably thought engineering was my professional future. But through music and this community service, it really exposed my horizons. And I thought about how we can create a civic and political model that is about bridging divides as opposed to furthering polarizing and dividing us. And of course, if you look at our nation, and last night's presidential debate was a great representation of this, of how divided and tribal our country has become. And that has a real consequence on our ability to solve problems at the national, state, and local level. So that's where Millennial Action Project comes in. Back about 8 years ago, my co-founders and I were looking at what are the forces that will most shape the future of our democracy, this diverse democracy that we have, that is the first experiment in the history of the human race, really, of creating a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy that embraces our diversity, but also finds areas of collective action. That's really the vision and goal of America. We saw polarization being a major threat to that vision. But the other key force that we saw is the rise of millennials and Generation Z, young people getting active in civics and politics and political office that could transform the political dynamic of our country. So that led to founding Millennial Action Project, and eventually we formed the nation's first ever and now largest network of young legislators who are working together in a cross-partisan fashion on generational issues. We've worked on everything from economic development, workforce development, to climate change, gun violence prevention, and more recently, criminal justice reform. And one of the things I've taken away from that is a methodology. And when people hear about bridging political divides, sometimes the different narratives get conflated with each other. So I want to be really explicit about how we're bridging these divides. When we're talking about working together, it's about finding the best ideas to advance our cause. It's about an evolution of ideas, not a dilution of ideas. It's seeking to find our common humanity in each other and empathize with views that are not our own, while also standing firmly on our principles. I often use jazz music as a metaphor for this because in jazz groups in particular, it's about listening. It's about creativity and improvisation. It's about call and response. That's the spirit that we're talking about for a high functioning democracy to work. Now, I want to highlight a couple things we've been doing locally and then get to the importance of voting this November. Now, here in Wisconsin, for 2 years, we launched a program and ran a program called Red and Blue Dialogues to put that methodology into practice with local elected officials who are part of our network here, as well as community members, to challenge the idea that Wisconsin is the most polarized state in the country, that we can't find common ground when people are doing that all the time. I sometimes think our national rhetoric has kind of distracted us from the communities that we have and the ways in which we are working together right now. So we launched this program, and we started here in Milwaukee and then took it statewide. We would organize bipartisan panels of local lawmakers, usually state representatives, also some city council members and mayors, as well as have professionally facilitated roundtables with community members. Each topic was focused on a different issue. Each dialogue would focus on, say, criminal justice reform or energy and the environment or workforce development up in Sheboygan. Up in Green Bay, for example, a big issue was water conservation. Here in Milwaukee, we had a few dialogues related to disinformation and racial justice. And I think one of the things that really came away, I'll share a really funny anecdote that I think is emblematic of the spirit here. So we were at the Bavarian Beer House doing this dialogue on criminal justice reform, had a Democratic and Republican state lawmakers there, local representative. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of or maybe familiar with David Bowen, who's part of our Wisconsin Future Caucus. That's the name of our chapter here in Wisconsin. And we would curate these tables to be politically diverse. But afterwards, there was a woman who came up to me and she said, "Stephen, I really enjoyed this dialogue, but I'm worried that I just felt like we were agreeing with each other too much." And of course, I said, "Ma'am, thank you so much for sharing that. But I also wanted to just share with you that sitting next to you, and she's a very liberal activist. I said, sitting next to you is the local head of the Republican Party, and to the right of you is the head of a local chapter of a very conservative group called Americans for Prosperity." And so, of course, she's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm sitting next to them." And not only that, I can't believe that we had so much common ground on the issue. So I think that's part of the magic here, is that we are breaking down these labels, breaking down these barriers, seeing each other as human beings with whom we can connect with. And I think that's a microcosm of what we need for this country and this democracy to succeed. Finally, let me talk about how this applies to voting, and I'm really eager to hear what's on your mind as well. So coming into this year with voting, as Brittany mentioned earlier, we need to vote, but also do so safely in a pandemic, and absentee voting is a crucial part of the solution. When the pandemic hit earlier this year, Millennial Action Project launched a new initiative around safe voting and election resiliency to make sure that voters are getting absentee ballot requests, for example, and getting the right information, and that election administrators have the funding to even do these things and protect themselves. So we worked in Wisconsin as well as a couple other key swing states. And again, using this methodology, we didn't write anyone off, invited people into the conversation. And because of those relationships and coalitions we built, we now have absentee ballot requests going out to voters across the state, here in Wisconsin, many other states. There have been a number of improvements to the voting system. And now, actually later this week, we'll be releasing what will be the first bipartisan video of sitting elected officials talking about safe voting, how you vote absentee, and the importance generally of making your voice heard this November. Just a couple specific pieces of information that's so important to know about voting. One is you can log on to myvote.wi.gov, find out your voter registration status, and then also you can request online your absentee ballot. And then there are 3 ways to turn in your ballot. And some of you may be familiar with a comedian named Charlie Behrens of the Manitowoc Minute, think Wisconsin accent, doing a local news parody. Him and I worked together in a video, and we're going through like what information do voters have and what needs to be made more clear. I think how you drop off your absentee ballot needs to be much more clear to voters. So let me kind of lay it out here. There are 3 ways to submit your absentee ballot. One is by mail, and you just send it back. The envelope you get has a prepaid postage. You send it back. If you do that, you want it to be early because there could be some delays with the postal service this year. The second is voting early in person. That's still called absentee voting. And there's an early vote period between October 20th and November 1st. And there are a bunch of different locations you can do that around the city. Finally, and this is, I think, one of the best methods, is dropping it off at a secure drop box. And I just got my absentee ballot here in Milwaukee, and they did a really good job of laying out all the different drop box locations across the city. So hopefully one is close by and you can drop it off. Now, I often hear this critique, and it's, I think, well-founded. Our politics is so broken. Why does my vote matter? And I sometimes feel that too, but my response to that, and I think the way we need to think about it, is what John Lewis reminded us to think. He said that voting is the most powerful nonviolent tool of social change in our democracy. I had the chance to actually meet John Lewis and share with him our work with the Millennial Action Project, and he was a young person himself when he first got involved, and he knew how important it was to protect the ability to vote and make our voices heard, and he put his life on the line in order to do that. So I think the way that we change the political dynamic of our country is by voting and is by showing up after the vote as well. And I think one of the ways you show up after the vote is being in touch with your local elected officials, being in touch with one of the members who are part of our Wisconsin Future Caucus, and elevate the issues that matter to you. But also one important piece of this is working to build the diverse coalitions for these issues to succeed. I often say, in a diverse democracy, real change doesn't happen without building a diverse coalition. So many people ask, the politics is so broken, we're so divided, what can I do about it? We can make a choice every single day how we choose to participate in this democracy. First is the choice to do so. And second is when we meet someone who has a different view than we do, do we approach that with suspicion and fear, or do we approach that with empathy and understanding? And I think we need to choose the latter path. That's what John Lewis believed in. And finally, what I'll just end with here is something that Martin Luther King III shared with me a few weeks ago. We had a summit that brought together our young leaders, and Martin Luther King III offered to share some words of wisdom. And the reason why I invited him is because I think there's a lot to learn from Dr. King's methodology of creating political change. And I asked him, how do you think Dr. King would be responding to the polarization and the cynicism of this moment? And he said, Stephen, my father would be calling people to a higher order. And we talked about what that higher order means. It's about our empathy for those who are suffering and those who need help. It's also our empathy for those who are different, including those who vote differently from ourselves. This model of radical love that Dr. King believed in is a revolutionary idea. And I think we ought to embody that and embrace it and champion it in this time when it's needed perhaps most ever in our lifetimes. So with that, I'll open it up for questions, and just very excited to be in dialogue with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. That was awesome. So one of the things I realized I forgot to mention at the beginning, if you are joining us and you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A section for us. If you are joining us on Facebook, go ahead and drop them into the chat there. We do have a staff person monitoring those. So here are 2 of the questions that we currently have. Do you think there's some concern about mailing in ballots? Not too long ago, there was like news coverage about like there may be some hiccups, something going on within the postal service. Do you think that people should be concerned?
I think maybe a better way of thinking about it is we should be vigilant and proactive. I do think there is a possibility of some delays with using the vote by mail, and simply because of the volume of absentee ballots that we're expecting probably over a million absentee ballots have already been requested in Wisconsin, actually. So I think the most important message there is vote early. You can vote right now. The election has already started. And I think if you do plan to submit by mail, make sure you at least give a couple weeks just to make sure that it can be processed properly. Otherwise, like I said, you can actually skip over USPS entirely. You're here in Milwaukee. I was so impressed with just the number of drop boxes they have. You can just drop it off 24 hours. It's open and it's secure. And I think that's a really good way of doing it. So I think it's not that the vote by mail is like rigged and fraudulent, like you hear some of those narratives in the national media. That's not true. That's factually untrue. But I do think we need to be proactive and vigilant when we approach vote by mail this year.
So our next question is, how can we meet in dialogue with people of different views and ideologies?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I have a mentor who he says bridge building in a democracy is not rocket science. It's much harder. And this is hard stuff. And it gets often to the core of human tendency and who we feel comfortable with and who we affiliate with and what makes us fearful. And all of those things are wrapped into it. And that's why I think it's just helpful to put in context what we're trying to do here is revolutionary and the first time ever in human history to try and build this kind of democracy, which hasn't been perfect ever in its history yet, but we're trying to make it better and better. So I think when we're in dialogue with someone who has a different view than us, I think just keep those jazz modes that I mentioned earlier in your mind. Again, 3 things. It's listening, which I think really activates our empathy, listening openly and without prejudgment. And it could be something that's completely contradictory to your value set. It's still helpful to listen because that's the first step to any type of coalition. And as part of that, don't write anyone off. And I have so many examples where even with absentee voting here in Wisconsin, there are people who would be not on any voting rights organization's radar who we reached out to, and we learned and listened. They actually do support it, but maybe you frame it in a different way. We brought them in, and now they've become active champions for safe voting here in Wisconsin. So that's the first step, is listening openly and with empathy. The second thing is, I called it earlier improvisation, which is kind of a jazz term, but in this context, think of it as reframing the issue, because don't think like we need to find the least common denominator between yourself and someone who has a completely different view. The metaphor I use is like a football field. Don't think we have to meet at the 50-yard line. Think about meeting on a new field altogether, because you've sought to listen, understand, and then you could perhaps move your entire conversation to a new ground, a new higher ground together. And then the third thing, in the jazz context, I called it call and response, but in this context, think about it as just not shutting down, but instead trying to have a live interaction where our involvement matters. It's so easy to shut down and feel disillusioned, but leaning in and being involved in these conversations, just know you're part of a huge mission here that's American self-government, trying to make it work. And then another thing you can do is reach out to organizations like Millennial Action Project that are trying to do this in a more structured way to try and give local residents here the tools to be successful with those conversations. Great question, though.
Awesome. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay, because I know she has some of our questions. So Lindsay, take it away.
Yes. So the first question we came in, and you did address this a little bit, but maybe we could dive a little bit deeper into some of the strategies. In a time when the divisions run so deep, what strategies would you recommend that we could use in our personal relationships to bring people together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, huge question. I often hear about families that are being split apart right now politically because of this larger tribalism and anger in our democracy. I saw a poll that came out showing that among Americans across the country, the two most prevalent, feelings right now are anger and fear. And you're seeing more and more families just kind of torn apart. And I think our interactions with the people around us every day is a microcosm of whether we're going to get out of this mess. And so we are so empowered and have such an important responsibility every day when we approach a conversation. Do we do so with an open mindset, with an interest in trying to bridge that divide? And you might not, and you might agree to disagree without being disagreeable. That's a phrase that Martin Luther King III mentioned to me a couple months ago as well. I think that's another way of looking at it. But I think oftentimes we're just talking past each other and using a different language, not realizing that we might agree on 80% of the issue that we're talking about. So I would just approach it with that mindset and just know that it's going to be hard, but we have a choice to make every day. Do we approach things with a spirit of love or with suspicion? And I think that's a choice we have to make.
I really like that. So looking ahead, how would you anticipate November's election results to affect the work of Millennial Action Project?
Oh, it has a huge impact, but in many ways, what I remind people of is it took us decades to get into this mess, and what we're seeing at the national level is a symptom of a lot of problems converging with each other. And we can, there's a whole another conversation, I guess, but what that also means is it's going to take a long time to dig ourselves out. So it's not as simple as if your preferred presidential candidate wins, all the problems are solved. In fact, it's couldn't be further from the truth. I think we're going to have a lot of problems of continued division and disillusionment. We continue to have problems with gerrymandering, for example. That's one of the reasons why we're in such a divided mode right now. The multi-billion-dollar campaign finance system that really creates a profit motive for fear and anger mongering across our country. So there are a lot of different issues we need to focus on, not the least of which are the ones we're being confronted with right now, which is getting out of the COVID pandemic and dealing with the racial justice public health crisis too. And I do frame it that way. And we have a huge pandemic in both spaces to deal with. So I just think that we have a deeper set of underlying problems here that we have to be focused on in terms of how our democracy works, how do our leaders work together in order to dig ourselves out of this mess. But I think even after the election result, there's going to be a lot of consternation and a lot of division in at that point. And I just think we got to do our best to try and hold the country together in what will be one of the most divisive moments probably in our lifetimes.
Another question. I have a challenge finding people with different views interested in discussing issues. Do you have any suggestions about where we might find these spaces for meaningful conversations?
Yeah, that's a huge issue because we're not only siloing ourselves into these echo chambers online through social media, which reinforces our own views, makes it so hard to find people with a different point of view, but also physically too. There's a number of studies that show that increasingly we're just living amongst people who generally agree with us politically. And if you look at the greater Milwaukee area, the political divide from Milwaukee downtown to the suburban counties like Waukesha County and Ozaukee County, for example, is the starkest political divide in the entire country. And so one of the inspirations for starting that Red and Blue Dialogue program is when we would talk to people on both sides of that divide, and they would tell us, we just feel like we're not hearing the whole story here and want to meet other people who can give us a broader perspective, but we don't have any means of doing that. So we said, well, let's build it. And we built the Red and Blue Dialogues program. So there are some programs like that. And if people want to reach out directly, I'm happy to get them, plugged in. Obviously with COVID, it's been a little harder to gather in person. But another thing too is just in terms of your media diet, think about how do you create and curate a set of information that really is trying to give you the whole picture. And then I do think try and find, people in your communities who might vote differently or have some type of different background and find a way to maybe virtually break bread with them. I think it's a little harder during the COVID pandemic, which has exposed so many of the, divisions in our community. But I do think, through a number of programs that we're doing, I know, check out the Zeidler Center for Public Discussion. We've partnered with them. They do a lot of really great dialogues as well. Oh, another thing, by the way, and this is just a little bit of a plug, but also a way to kind of hear different political views. We recently launched a new podcast, and I think podcasts are one of the more promising media vehicles right now to have this type of discussion. It's called Meeting in Middle America. It's with UW-Milwaukee and WisPolitics.com, and we have those types of conversations every week. So tune into that, Meeting in Middle America.
Wonderful. We'll share that link in our Facebook comments so people have that. Those were all the questions that we had come through. So I'll turn it back over to Brittany.
All right. So I actually have one other question. For those who are looking to become involved with Millennial Action Project, how should they go about doing so?
Absolutely. We need everyone to be involved at this time in this existential moment almost for our democracy. So if you want to get involved, few things you can do. First of all, if you want to get directly involved with Millennial Action Project, I think there'll be a contact page you'll see, but feel free to reach out directly to me or log on to our website. There's a tab there that says Get Involved, and there are methods to get involved of any time commitment you have. It could be as simply as trying to share a message on social media. It could be, perhaps hosting a virtual dialogue, or it could even be engaging directly with our state legislatures here in Wisconsin and working with our local chapter here and becoming a local leader. We have some super volunteers in the community who do amazing work and organize some amazing events. And I'm just so inspired just seeing them kind of organize and be part of the solution. So if you want to be a super volunteer, definitely get in touch. So I think that's the biggest thing. And then the other point I'll just make, more generally, is that this idea of Millennial Action Project, the methodology that's behind it, is something you can apply into your daily life every day. And we have some written pieces that can just help you get jump started in that mode. So if you want to get more information on that, again, just reach out to myself or reach out through our website.
All right.
Perfect.
Yeah. So if you are looking to get involved, please visit their website at www.millennialaction.org. As you can see, we also have contact information for Stephen. If you'd like to, reach out to him, but your best bet will probably be going to that website. So with that, Stephen, thank you for giving us your time. One thing that I will ask you to do before we wrap this webinar up is just, if you could again, just press on the importance of making sure people are getting their votes in.
Absolutely. It's been such an honor to be with all of you today. Big thanks again to the entire Near West Side team. I think voting is more important this year perhaps than ever in our lifetimes. And just when I think about what sacrifices people have made in our community and some of our biggest heroes like John Lewis and Dr. King have made in order for us to have this ability to vote, it's truly extraordinary. And I know it's a tough time and it's cynical moments in general. But I think the best vehicle we have right now to start turning this dynamic around, whether we want to move the needle on racial justice, whether we want to elect more bridge builders into office, whether we want to have better economic opportunities in our state and attract young people to our state. All of those big issues are on the ballot. And especially for people who are concerned with the actual functioning of our democracy and things like partisan gerrymandering, that is absolutely on the ballot because, as Brittany mentioned earlier, we're doing the census. And the maps in Wisconsin for the next decade will largely be decided by the census and who's in office as a result of this election. So this is a game changer type election, and we absolutely encourage you to vote, but do so safely. And maybe when we have this video come out, we can circulate it with you because I'll have some great information.
Awesome.
Thank you again so much. Very excited, and please be in touch.
Of course. So we are just going to wrap up quickly. So with that being, well, we already did questions, so that's wonderful. So thank you everybody for attending our Wednesday webinar series. We really appreciate the time you take out of your day to join us every week. If this was your first time joining us, we hope that you become a regular, and we hope that you all found this information very important, and that you remember to make sure that your voice is being counted and heard. So with that, as we wrap up, if you are looking for ways to support Near West Side Partners, please visit our website at nearwestsidemke.org. Thank you all and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.